You may have heard about CityWorks Expo. For years now, we've been bringing people together to share big ideas for better places. Expo connects innovators across the community and around the globe through an ongoing series of events, conferences, and social media. And our goal is to inspire and support people like you, the ones who have a passion for making their neighborhoods, communities, and cities better places to live, work, and play. Check us out at cityworksxpo.com to learn more. Become a part of the Expo community and share your story. You never know who you will inspire with your big ideas.
Good afternoon.
Hey, everybody.
I do not beatbox. That is, I was telling her that I could do that, but I actually cannot. I'm horrible at that. At some presentations, the expectation is that you will put away your cell phones, mobile devices, and computers, and we want to embrace the 21st century and actually ask everyone to pull out their cell phones, mobile devices, tablets, laptops, pull them out, hold them in the air if you got them. All right. Can you put it on silent, because we're going to try to use this, no ringers, but immediately, if you use Twitter, follow New Majority Labs. Look it up, find it. It's a brand new account. We created it yesterday. We have 1 follower.
We need followers.
If we can be increased to at least 50 followers by today, I will feel very successful. So follow us now. Keep your phones, tablets, mobile devices. You will actually be using them during this presentation, so keep them handy. Tweet, follow the hashtags of the conference. Let's have a good time. So we want to have a very, very, very quick agenda where we, rather than launching into kind of our work, we want to start with talking about who we are, what led us to the work, and then we'll talk about what we do. So I'm Derwin Dubose.
I'm Vedette Gavin.
And we are the co-founders of New Majority Community Labs. I like to start by talking about John chapter 1, verse 45. Can any good thing come from Nazareth? It's my mama's favorite Bible story. Nathaniel mocks Jesus because he comes from a good-for-nothing town. Philip replies, "Come and see." Can any good thing come from Nazareth? Come and see. And I like to start there because I come from a good-for-nothing town, York, Alabama, which is right outside of where I was born, Meridian, Mississippi. And York is a town of about 2,800 people. It is 88% black. It looks just like the picture you see. What's very interesting is that I come from a long line of people who have roots in York. I grew up in this single-wide trailer on a dirt road in York. We used to have feral chickens grazing in the front yard, and I have a vague memory that my mother confirmed that we used to have ducks that someone bought, but they didn't migrate it to water, so they didn't hang out in the front yard. This is where I grew up for the first 16 years of my life. My mother has lived her entire life in York. She started off being a teacher in a low-income school and ended up becoming a district-level administrator and the principal of our high school in the county. But she's lived her entire life in York. My grandmother raised white children for a living, and she has lived her entire life in York. My great-grandmother actually ran our town's illegal liquor operation, which it was a dry county until the 1990s, and she was the kingpin of moonshine in York, Alabama, the queen pin. She lived her entire life in York. My great-great-grandmother, born a slave in York. So my mother realized that growing up in a majority black, poor, still segregated town in the South usually spells unemployment, drugs, death, or prison for a young black boy. So she sends me 3 hours away to the Alabama School of Mathematics and Science, which is a public boarding school in Mobile, Alabama, for the state's best and brightest students. So then I got a scholarship to go to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which isn't that far down the road. Go Heels. We cheated, though. We did. In basketball, we did. So I go on a full scholarship to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, roughly about 12 hours away from home. I then built a great life in North Carolina. I started working for politicians. That's me. I look a lot skinnier. I used to work for the Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina, the State Treasurer of North Carolina. I worked in nonprofits, had a nonprofit consulting firm, worked for Habitat for Humanity, several other really stoic institutions. I bought this beautiful house and started getting interested in place-based work when I moved into this area that was redeveloped by our city's Department of Housing and Community Development. And we realized that crime was a significant problem on our street. And rather than waiting on the city to fix crime, my neighbors and I came together to form a homeowners association. And working together, we subsidized the cost of a police officer to live on our street. We didn't want to put up gates or fences, but people would know, oh, a cop lives there. I don't want to mess with those people. So we, as a street and a local community, came together and devised a solution that worked for us, all right? So I spent my time in North Carolina. I got a beautiful dog, had the perfect life. It was awesome. And the key underpinning of the story I'd learned for the first 26 years of my life was that the further away from home I got, the more opportunity there was for me. That thought led me to the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, where I was a Sheila C. Johnson Leadership Fellow, and Vedette was as well. We'll talk more about that. And that's me hosting a session with Reverend William Barber, who's the leader of the Moral Monday movement in North Carolina, president of NAACP. I was able to go to Harvard. I never fit into Harvard because if you met Harvard people, no, that's not my tribe. But it was an amazing opportunity to understand leadership, to understand global networks and how the work I do connects to the way the world works. Again, the further away from home, this was a 22-hour train ride for my mother to come to my graduation. The further away from home, the better the opportunity. But that notion was challenged one day when I went to this gas station in Durham. I am a night hawk. I stay awake till like 4 a.m. almost every night. And at 1 a.m. one night, I was craving a ginger ale. Like really, like I want, and not just any ginger ale, not Schweppes, not Canada Dry. I needed a Faygo brand ginger ale. And this was the only gas station in Durham, North Carolina that sold Faygo ginger ale. I walked into the gas station, and immediately a police officer comes up to me and says, "Put your hands behind your back." It's like, excuse me? So let's back up a second. This is how I normally dress, suit, nice clothes. I do wear some sneakers. But that night, I decided that I wasn't going to dress up. So I had a ratty tank top, had some long basketball shorts that went to my knees. I had on some Adidas slide sandals, and my two lovely tattoos. Okay, one says it's a great thing to do something others say can't be done. I'm proud of that one. Another says Durham. That was a mistake. But I'll buy it. So I went into the store, my tattoos are visible, and I immediately realized that the officer thinks I'm another person. So I say, "Excuse me, officer." He's like, "Put your hands behind your back. I arrested you last week. I'm bringing you in." I said, "No, sir, you did not." "No, you have a brother." "No, sir, only child and only grandchild." "You were driving that car." I said, "Sir, the silver Honda Accord is actually the most driven vehicle on U.S. roads." So he said, "Again, put your hands behind your back." I said, "I need to show you something on my phone. Can I do that before you arrest me?" He said, "Sure." That's the contact for Mayor Bill Bell, the mayor of Durham, North Carolina. And I said, "Officer, I can make this phone call right now if you would like." That is his personal cell phone. "Or we can handle this civilly." And the officer immediately took a step back, said, "Oh, sir, may I see your identification?" Handed him my ID. He realized it was a case of mistaken identity. I was then free to buy my ginger ale. So I think about the notion that going further away from home would bring me more opportunity, but I bought into a false narrative that the more privilege I got through education, through income, through access, through jobs, would shield me from those same things my mom sent me away: unemployment, jail, drugs, and death. And I think about, what about the folks who live in Durham or any community I've lived in who don't have mayors in their cell phone and who don't have those privilege points, and how different that interaction would have been?
I think about those people too. The people like the ones that I grew up in my Nazareth, in Columbus, Ohio. See, I learned a different lesson, but it takes the same geography, that the farther away from home I got, the farther away from my Nazareth that I got, the better able I would be to solve problems, the better equipped I would be to help my community. I grew up here. See, I'm a preacher's kid of a preacher's kid of a preacher's kid. That's 3 generations. This is my home church, St. Peter's Lutheran Church in Columbus, Ohio. Any Buckeyes? OH? There we go. There we go. So, Columbus, Ohio. This is on the north side of Columbus in a neighborhood called Linden. This church has been standing for 250 years and was predominantly German. And the neighborhood around it began to change in the 50s and the 60s, so it was this old community place that was surrounded by a changing community. This is my grandfather and my grandmother, family full of afros. My grandfather, Ani Hiko, was actually the one who integrated this church. They bought a house around the corner from the church and had never known anything about Lutheranism. And when he got to the church, they were still having services completely in German. They were the first African-American family to integrate that church. My grandfather became an evangelist, and he would take the pulpit Sunday after Sunday and proclaim that social justice is the call of every believer. So this is where I grew up. Here we are. I won't point myself out because my hair was not that cute then. But this is what a typical Sunday looked like by the time I came around. First African-American family in the church, and this is what it looked like by the time I got there. We've got Somali refugees, Latino children, Indian children, African-American children, white children. By the time I grew up, we had 4 services in 4 different languages. And this was the church that we proudly named when we were young, the Rock on the Block. They asked us, what is it that you want this church to be for your community as young people? And we said, somewhere safe, somewhere solid. And my dad used to say, you know, Peter, upon this rock I will build my church. You need to be solid in believing in your community, in believing in your church, in believing in your God, and believing in yourself. So we were this group of misfit kids. We had a t-ball team. When we would go out and play, people would kind of look, where are all these multicultural kids? Half of them don't even speak English, but they're friends. It was just kind of this weird anomaly in the middle of this crumbling neighborhood, but this is where we were. We grew up with a can-do attitude. So here we are, high school. I'm right in the middle there. See my cheeks, they're still pretty fat and puffy like they are now. So I'm right in the middle here. High school, this same group of kids, we grew up and we realized that a lady named Vanessa Green, who we all called our auntie, you know, you have that one lady who everybody wants to be their auntie. Vanessa Green, her house was burned down. She lived down the street, and it was burned down in an act of arson. So this youth group for our service project that year rebuilt her house. We were very much told and we very much believed that when there was a problem in the community, we were the ones we should look to, even at such a young age, to try to solve it. So, fast forward, off to college I go. University of Maryland, I decide I'm really, really, really into health. I love science. I want to be a doctor, but school was too long and too expensive. So I ended up going into public health. I graduated from Ohio State, and I returned home in 2008 to serve as a public health planner. But this is what I came home to, back to my community. This was the crisis that was breaking out in Columbus. Low birth weight babies and infant mortality was sweeping the state of Ohio, and the epicenter was in Columbus. African-American children were dying at twice the rate of white babies. And our health commissioner called together a town forum for people to come together, hear the data, and talk about it. People were there, and a woman stood up with her baby in her arms and said, why haven't you done more? We keep hearing this data. We've seen it on the news. We've heard it in the newspaper. We've had talks about it. Why haven't you done more? And my health commissioner's response said, unfortunately, with limited resources, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. Where's the community's outrage? Without outrage, we can't act. And in that moment, I realized that going to school was great, getting the technical skill to write grants and run public health programs and, understand what children should eat to be healthy and connect women to prenatal care was great. But that systems weren't formed to act rapidly. that the people, the solutions that we created in our community, in our church, those were the things that we were able to do quickly. So I went back to that same group of people, to my church. These are 3 women in my church, and I said, you will never believe what happened at work. I told them about it, and they said, a bunch of babies in the community have been dying. We know a lot of those mothers. Let's bring them together and figure out what we can do. After that talk, we formed a program called Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies. See, what we realized by talking to those women is that teenage pregnancy and low birth weight babies was generational in our neighborhood. So what we did was we took teenage mothers and their teenage mothers and their teenage mothers, and we moved 3 generations of families through a support program. And by the time the city caught up to us, in 2014, this is when they finally launched the Infant Mortality Task Force. We had moved 70 families in that one neighborhood through this program. So fast forward, I meet Derwin last year.
Yeah, we locked eyes at a luncheon from across the room.
It was magical.
And it was like immediate. And she immediately put me in the friend zone. So you don't have to think there's not that type of partnership. But we decided that we were going to talk about the issues that were going on in the community, what's been in the news for the past 18 months, and decided to come together to work on New Majority Community Labs.
So we thought about, Derwin shared his story about trying to create opportunities for people who didn't have mayor's numbers in their cell phones. And I talked about my constant struggles on the ground with realizing people know what they need and they have great ideas, but systems just don't react and they just don't listen. And New Majority Community Labs was birthed.
So I will give a disclaimer. This is a very diverse group, but I'm a dork. If you haven't figured it out yet, I'm not actually wearing glasses and a bow tie like sometimes you'll see me do. So when things have been happening across the nation, I was so proud of the people who protested and were out there, but I was like, that's not me. So as a dork, what can I do to channel my anger? Statistics. So in 27 years, people of color will emerge as the majority of the U.S. And that's like, I'm older than 27. So very soon, people of color will be the majority. But when you look at the social sector today, people of color are not represented. And it's not showing up well. But the basic gist is that right now, people of color are 38% of the population. But the police force is actually where people of color are the most represented at 25%. When you go to nonprofit employees and elected officials, that's 18% and 10%, but we all know where most decisions are really made in low-income communities really rely on the nonprofit sector, which is either administering government directives or actually on the ground doing the work. Only 8% of nonprofit executives are of color, only 7% of nonprofit board members are of color, and if you think about the criminal justice system, only 5% of prosecutors are of color, despite the fact that 50% of the population will be of color very soon. So we looked at what communities are struggling with these issues as we approach a new majority. These are the 21st century Nazareths. These are communities, states, territories that have flipped to become majority-minority already. 1,300 communities, individual communities, 117 just made this switch since 1990. 10 states and territories, 9 states will soon become majority-minority within the next at least 2 census data collection points. And 1 state, South Carolina, used to be majority-minority. So you've got a swath of new Nazareths, communities that have made that switch that we need to pay attention to and that we need to empower before we write them off. So you've been seeing what's been going on in the news. People are frustrated. People are angry, and time got it right when what's been going on the past 2 years really resembles 1968. And when I actually ran the numbers, the statistic that stands out the most for me is that 32 monuments to the Confederacy have been defaced this summer alone. And when you see that, let's not get political. Whether you like those actions or not, those actions resemble more Tahrir Square, Tunisia. Things we see on CNN International that don't look like the US, that anger is there, and we need to work to include people so they don't feel like that anger is the only way they can participate in this democracy and share their opinions.
So we believe, when we were thinking about, okay, what do we do about this? We had to come to terms with what we fundamentally believe. And what we believe is that if given the tools and opportunity, any community, any group of people, especially communities of color, are very capable of identifying and solving their own challenges. We believe that a single mother in Cleveland, Ohio, knows more about her kids' friends, the school, the library, the church, the block that she lives on, knows more about those people and what they need, what opportunities and resources they need, than I ever would sitting in my office as a health planner, than I ever would running an analysis or a needs assessment. That people in their own communities are capable agents of change.
So we will open innovation labs that train residents to identify and solve their own civic challenges. And what you can't see is that communities own the solutions, not us. The thought in our sector is that I'm guilty of it. Man, we've got the solution. If only they would. No, the communities know what's best for them. And we will open innovation labs to help people uncover that. So in those labs, we're going to train everyday people. When I say everyday people, I think about the song. We're talking about your Pookies, your Ray Rays.
He doesn't sing.
You're talking about the shop owner down the street. You're talking about the family that owns the dry cleaners. We're talking about everyday folks. We have a myth that you have to have a certain degree, a certain credential, a certain level of affluence in order to tackle big civic problems. And we believe the person on the street that you walk up to can identify and solve their own challenges. And we train people to first organize their neighbors, second, collect and analyze data, third, design their own civic ideas, and then fund their ideas collaboratively. Too often we depend on outside funding, and if you're in the nonprofit sector, you know what that means. You're waiting on outside funding to fund your program. We believe that communities can fund their own. It takes a different approach, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's the key to sustainability in these communities. So when you go inside an innovation lab, the first thing we try to find is a lab manager that comes from within the community. Again, challenging the way I have done business in the past. Rather than bringing a great organizer who's done great work in another city to go in and work, identifying someone who lives on the ground and in that community and put them to work as a part-time organizer to bring folks together, working with a local partner. For instance, in Meridian, Mississippi, we've had conversations with the Boys and Girls Club of Eastern Mississippi to be a partner to house the lab and also to give key advising to build the capability of that lab manager and to inform our work. Now, that lab manager, again, who comes from the community, will recruit 15 community problem solvers, 15 folks who live in the specific community. They will come to the table with what we call tri-sector volunteer learners. So people from the nonprofit sector, people from government, people from private enterprise who can come to the table to help. But our challenge is we like to go in to tell communities what to do. And here's the best practice, and you should do this. Volunteer learners. We're asking those folks to come into the community to learn from the community rather than to lead the agenda. And we also empower local celebrities. So people who, from a basketball player all the way down to, that very popular person in the community who can give credibility, get people revved up. So the problem solvers work with those other folks who are working to help to empower 50 people in the community each. So 750 neighbors total to get them involved and engaged in uncovering what the problems are in the community and also devising the solutions.
So how do problem solvers get the community engaged? Well, as we talked about, it begins with data. First, we would teach them to go out, engage with neighbors, collect information, and synthesize it, share it with the community in a way that's usable. Telling communities, okay, this is how many people live here. Here's all the things that people said are great about the community. Here's things that people said that they don't like about the community. Here's some of the most popular opportunities that were identified by neighbors. After they share that information with neighbors, they'll invite teams of community members to come in and create big ideas. So it could be a group of students from a school. It could be a grandmother, her grandchild, and a neighbor. It could be a pastor, a merchant, and two people who live down the street. Teams will come in and say, you know what? We have a creative way to solve that problem that was identified by the community. We'll give them coaching, we'll give them support, and then we will allow the community to vote for and fund their favorite ideas at a big community Shark Tank, where all of those supporters from the not-for-profit sector and those partners that have come from NGOs and those local celebrities will come together, ramp the community up, and the community will vote and fund their favorite solutions. So, what did this look like? In Cleveland, Ohio, which was one of our first proof of concept cities, problem solvers rallied around the issue of health, and they identified really interesting things when they talked to people. People went out and said, I would take my family swimming if only there was a pool. But then you would look on the Parks and Rec's website and see that there are 3 pools in the same neighborhood. Something doesn't match up. When you go into those rec centers, you see the paint falling off the sides of the pools. One of the pools was in the basement. That's just weird. Who goes swimming in the basement? So we found out that there's all these non-useful opportunities to be physically active. So the problem solvers engaged the community in finding creative ways to take back those spaces or create new opportunities that were actually functional and inviting. That turned into 40 free exercise classes, 3 outdoor fitness zones, walking trails, and 2 gyms, all because people were able to really close the gap between what the perceived opportunities were and what the real opportunities were.
So we mentioned our work in Durham and organizing neighbors around law enforcement and public safety, but also one of my favorite things to do in the world is I partner with the National Trust for Historic Preservation to protect Rosenwald schools. Raise your hand if you know what a Rosenwald school is. We got a few people. So the short story is the philanthropist Julian Rosenwald, who was the CEO of Sears, was approached by Booker T. Washington to say, hey, I want to build some schools. They won't give me money to build schools for black people. So Julius Rosenwald was like, cool, dude, I'll give you some school money. But it has to be a matching grant. And they set up one of the first matching grant systems in the US where 1/3 of the money would come from the Rosenwald Fund, 1/3 of the money would come from the local black community, and 1/3 of the money would come from the white community in the South. The key piece that the Rosenwald Foundation provided is technical assistance. So a community wouldn't have to start from scratch to come up with a plan. They would go, great, we've got architects. How many kids do you have in the community? Great. Here's a school design for 27 kids that has worked in other communities. So it was technical assistance while letting the black community itself take the lead. They built over 3,000 Rosenwald schools across the country, but only about 500 are left today. So with the National Trust for Historic Preservation, we train nonprofits who protect Rosenwald schools. There are hundreds out there, and they are small nonprofits who are led 98% by people of color, and they are black grandmas, just like my grandma. And when I walk into the training room, they question whether this young boy can teach them anything, but we have intensive boot camps where we go through fundraising and board development and also crossing cultures into working with youth. And it is amazing to have conversations with people who don't show up to your typical board training or your Association for Fundraising Professionals meeting and eat like good barbecue and great fattening food and talk about how they can go in their local communities. We've worked with about 40 different communities to learn how they can protect gems that are priceless to them and their communities. So let's go to talk about the lab. So, all right, all you people who got permission to use your phones, hold up your phone again. All right, so go to your calendar. And so right now, we're going to let you be a problem solver within our community lab and mark the dates. You don't have to literally, but we're gonna walk you through what a typical month might look like in our community labs.
All right, so one of the first things we do is recruit our problem solvers and equip them with tools and leadership skills. So boot camp. You might spend your first Saturday in a boot camp maybe about public narrative, learning about the power of connecting your story to the stories of others to mobilize people. You may be really dorked out that day and go through a data boot camp where you learn what is data, how do I collect it, what is a survey, what makes data valid. You may do some asset mapping or some power mapping, walking around talking to people on your block saying, okay, what are the assets that you believe are present in this community? So we would do a fun but intense 8-hour day on a Saturday on one of these elements of boot camp.
So then next you have data collection and analysis days. So you might spend 4 days in a week actually polling 50 of your neighbors. equipped with an iPad or a tablet, or whether it's qualitative data, you may have a week of focus groups where you talk to people. And we coach local people on how to collect this data and analyze it themselves to figure out what the problems are in their community and to start to derive what the solutions might be.
So we realize that community solutions are not created in a vacuum. So another important element is learning to navigate systems in power. So you might have dinner, say, with the director of Parks and Recreation, like the problem solvers in Cleveland, and say, so explain to us how resources are allocated to recreation centers in our community. We have a pool that we would like to be redeveloped. What is the process for community members to get something raised on the priority list? Learning to navigate those relationships, and then going back to the lab and mapping out who's in power, who has the decision-making power, and who are these people connected to.
So we would also have you go to church. And if our community idea as an expo group of problem solvers is that we want to open up a laundromat in our community, because you know what? Public transit sucks, and the closest laundromat is a mile away, then we know it might cost $100,000 total to open up that laundromat. So our model has us provide a 3-to-2 challenge grant to communities. So we would provide $60,000 to match the community's 40. So philanthropy in these communities doesn't work exactly the same. You wouldn't find one individual to just write the $40,000 check and put their name on the laundromat and have a big ribbon cutting and grand opening honoring that person. But within communities of color and low-income communities, there's power in crowdfunding. So you might ask First Baptist Church to challenge First Calvary Church to see which one can raise $5,000 toward the laundromat first. You can ask local people to pitch in. You can go to different barbershops and beauty shops to ask people to donate. You can also ask the guy who you know got his electrician certification and he's trying to find a job, hey, will you donate your time in kind to make sure the wiring works? So the community really pitches in. I use the example of Madagascar, where there was an NGO that built a well, and they didn't ask the community, they built the well. It was supposed to help the women who had to walk 1 mile to get the well. The well was destroyed in 2 weeks. Guess who destroyed the well? The women. Because in their culture, women go get water, and socializing with their friends only happens when they walk that mile back and forth. And third, not fetching water meant that they had to hang out with their husbands and sons, and that was absolutely horrible. And what they really wanted was carts. And so when you actually get people to not only derive the solution themselves, but have some skin in the game, some financial ownership over what the solution is, they appreciate it more. They invest in it. They use it. They feel like this is my laundromat, not just a thing that just happened to appear one day.
So one other thing that's really, really important is bringing people together in new ways. And I think everybody's here at Expo because we believe in that. So one of the other things that we would support our problem solvers in doing is finding new, fun, and engaging ways to bring people together, to form new relationships, and input new data that we figured out from the community, share it back with neighbors in fun and engaging ways. So you may have a block party. Our problem solvers in Cleveland would have harvest festivals and Zumba parties and fitness pop-ups, and would share information that they've learned about the community back with the community when they came. So if I'm at a Zumbathon, they would share information about, here are all the new exercise programs that have popped up, and here are some of the success stories from your neighbors. When they created a fitness scholarship program, they also had a pop-up and then said, how many entrepreneurial people are in the community? Come to this pop-up and learn about fitness opportunities for you.
So my favorite, stipend day. So one of the expectations that the sector tends to have is that low-income people or people of color just have all this time. And so the expectation is unduly bent on people completely volunteering their time. And when you don't have a culture within a community of active civic participation, you have to build it. So part of our model is that we provide incentivized stipends. If you participate, if you're a problem solver, if you're in the lab, if you're working, if you accomplish the objectives that we've set out for the quarter, you get a quarterly stipend. Not enough to replace any income, but a financial incentive to let people get engaged and involved, and that over time you empower more people and give people who might have issues of childcare, might have issues of income, might have issues of work, a little bit of an opportunity to participate.
All right. And the last one that's not showing up on the calendar, and I'm stuck on this page.
Can you move us?
Thank you. It's good to have friends in high
Yeah.
places. So the last thing that you would culminate the month with would be the Community Shark Tank. So this is the big event that brings all the hard work of the problem solvers and those community members who came up with big ideas together. So the teams of residents who came together in the lab and said, I have a way to solve this problem. They get coaching throughout the month, and they bring their big, bold ideas and their business plans that they have been supported by local coaches. They would bring them to that Community Shark Tank, and we'd invite the entire neighborhood out and say, here's the pot of money that this team has raised. It may be $25,000 on the table. Hear the pitches from your community innovators and vote for your favorite pitch. Our local celebrities would be there, and they would contribute to the event, provide some match funds as well, and we would provide our 3-2 match funds as well. And the community would be able to say, you know what, out of these 10 ideas, we have $25,000 to fund them. We want to fund the Boys and Girls Club basketball tournament, and we want to fund the grandmother's program for, you know, whatever she may make up. But so they would fund those programs at the Shark Tank.
So So technology is not cooperating with us, because this is supposed to be a poll where you're supposed to actually participate in participatory democracy. So I'm going to ask, can you click that link that says open poll in your web browser, and let's see what happens. So we're going to ask you in our remaining minutes to actually participate in our Shark Tank and to give your opinion on whether or not you think this will work. Does this idea advance placemaking? And so since we're having technical difficulties, Vedette, do you want to lead it old school without the technology?
Okay, so we're going to do this old school style. So I hope that you're not asleep. We're going to take an audible poll. If you believe, you can use your hands. If you believe that the New Majority Community Labs approach would help support better placemaking in your community, could you give a round of applause? Now, to put you on the spot, if you don't believe it, stand up. Just kidding.
So the idea is, rather than pitching ideas to communities and saying, here's the solution that's right for you, so we are tight on time, here we go. So if you would like to participate in the online poll, and these are the type of tools we use in communities to inspire participation. Again, not everybody's gonna go to the town hall meeting that meets at the city council quarters at a certain time and sit through an 8-hour agenda. But if you can give people a 30-minute pitch on something that might work for them, this is an example. So some people are already doing it. This is live. We are not rigging this, 100% yet. So you can go to that link. You can text New Majority Labs to that number. You can tweet at us to say whether or not you believe that this would support better placemaking in your community.
So while you're voting, we want to tell you a little
Go back
bit,
to the PowerPoint.
and you'll see on the next slide, but we're tight on time, so we want to tell you a little bit about the communities that we're launching in. And so we are supporting launch programs in both of our home communities. So in Columbus, Ohio, which is a community that has not yet become majority minority, but is on the way, leadership in the public sector really realizes that we have a completely untapped segment of our population that is growing, and their talents and skills are not being developed or utilized in solving some of the complex problems that we're having there. So we are partnering really with public sector organizations and private sector companies who want communities to be more capable and able to participate in democracy there.
So let's go back to the poll if you can, Andy. Andy's my friend. And see how many people have participated. This is risky because you could say you actually hate this idea, and this is now going to be on YouTube forever. So there we go.
Okay.
So thank you very much.